She slid the envelope across the table like it was nothing, like it was a grocery receipt, like it was a parking ticket, like the words inside hadn't just ended two lives before they even had a chance to begin. Sue Min Park set her teacup down, smoothed the front of her silk blouse, and watched Amar Ellis open the letter with trembling hands. She didn't look away. She wanted to see every second of it, the way Amar's eyes moved across the page, the exact moment her face cracked, the precise second the light went out. "He knows about the baby," the letter said. "He asked me to tell you. He's not ready to be a father. He wants you to take care of it." Amar's hand stopped moving. Sue Min picked up her teacup again and took a slow sip. "I'm sorry," she said, and she wasn't sorry at all. If you've ever loved someone so completely that losing them felt like losing the ability to breathe, if you've ever been handed a lie so carefully wrapped it looked like the truth, then this story will reach something deep inside you. Stay with me until the very end, because what Jae-won discovers 12 years later will break your heart before it puts it back together. If this story moves you, hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to know how far this story has traveled. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because the stories we tell here are the kind that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. The box was not supposed to exist. That was the first thing Kang Jae-won thought when he pulled it from behind the false wall panel inside his grandmother's estate library. A room he had walked through 100 times without once suspecting what was hidden 3 inches behind the shelving. It was a plain wooden box, no markings, no lock. The kind of thing you'd pass over entirely if you weren't already on your knees, dismantling a dead woman's private world piece by piece, trying to find anything that still felt like her. His grandmother had died 11 days earlier. Quietly, the way she had lived most of her final years, with her eyes open and her mouth carefully closed. She had outlasted 2 generations of Kong family violence, survived the building of an empire that should have killed her, and watched her grandson become something she never wanted him to become. And in the end, she had left him one last instruction. Find the box behind the east shelving. Read everything inside it, then decide what kind of man you still want to be. He had assumed it was money, or legal documents, or photographs she wanted buried. His grandmother had always been precise and unsentimental about legacy. He had not expected the handwriting. The first letter was in English. Curved, careful letters pressed hard into the page like the person writing them was fighting to stay controlled. He recognized it immediately, the way you recognize a song you haven't heard in years the moment the first note lands. His body knew before his mind caught up. "Jae-won, I know you're gone. I know your family took you away. But I need you to know something, and I need you to know it from me, not from anyone else." He was sitting on the floor of his grandmother's library at 2 in the morning. The house was empty. His driver was parked outside and had been told not to come in for any reason. The lawyers had finished for the day. The household staff had gone home. There was no one to watch Kang Jae-won, head of the Baek Kryong syndicate, one of the most feared men in Seoul's criminal underworld, lower himself to the floor of a dead woman's library and begin to shake. He kept reading. "I'm scared, and I'm alone, and I don't know what to do. I've been calling the number I had for you, but it just rings. I wrote to your school address, but nobody answered. I tried going through your cousin Marcus, but he told me he didn't know how to reach you. I don't know if any of this is getting to you. I don't know if you'll ever see this. But I'm writing it anyway because it's the only thing I know how to do. I'm pregnant. It's yours. I need you to know it's yours." The words sat on the page and did not move. Words never move. That was the thing about letters. They were permanent in a way that conversations weren't. You could misremember a conversation. You couldn't misread something in front of your own eyes. He set the first letter down. He picked up the second, then the third. By the 4th letter, his hands were no longer steady. By the 6th, he had to stop and set everything down and press the heels of his palms against his eyes, because something was happening inside his chest that he didn't have language for. He had spent 12 years building a wall between himself and the name Amara Ellis. He had been methodical about it, deliberate. He had trained himself the way you train yourself to not flinch at the sound of a gun, through repetition, through discipline, through convincing himself the feeling was something he had grown past. He had not grown past it. He had just buried it. The letters were dated. He could see exactly when she had written each one. The first was from 3 weeks after he was taken back to Korea. The last was dated 4 months after that. and it was the shortest one, half a page. The handwriting was different by then, harder, like something had gone out of her. I got a message from someone who said they spoke for you. I don't want to believe it, but you haven't answered anything I've sent, and it's been 4 months, and I can't keep doing this to myself. I made a decision. I had to make a decision alone. I needed you, and you weren't here. I don't know what happened to you. I don't know if you're okay, but I can't wait anymore. I'm letting you go. I hope you find something worth all of this. He sat with that letter for a long time. Then he went back through the box and found what he had missed on the first pass. A printed email chain, folded into thirds, tucked beneath everything else like it had been placed there deliberately last. His grandmother's handwriting was on a small note card attached to it with a paperclip. This came to me 6 years ago. I could not bring myself to show you then. I was afraid of what you would do. I am more afraid now of what you won't do if you never see it. He unfolded the pages. The email chain was between 2 addresses. One he didn't recognize. The other belonged to Sumin Park. He read it twice to make sure he understood what he was looking at. Then he read it a third time because his mind kept trying to reroute around the conclusion, kept looking for another explanation, kept insisting there had to be a different way to interpret the words on the page. There wasn't. The email he was holding was the follow-up to the letter Su Min had hand-delivered to Amara Ellis 12 years ago. The fake letter. The one written in a voice that wasn't his, signed with a meaning that wasn't his, carrying a message he had never sent and never would have sent. Jaewon said he is not ready to be a father. He wants you to take care of it. He had not written that. He had not known Amara was pregnant. He had spent 12 years believing she had simply moved on, that the love they had was real, but that she had chosen a different life, that she had found someone else, that people did that and you couldn't blame them, and you certainly couldn't hate them for surviving. She hadn't moved on. She had been told he didn't want her. She had gone through the pregnancy alone. She had made a decision alone. She had carried the weight of that decision alone for 12 years. And the entire time, the woman sleeping in the other wing of his own house. The woman who wore his name and sat beside him at dinner and smiled for photographs and shook hands with his business associates, had known exactly what she'd done. Chaewon set the papers down. He was very still for a long moment. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked out of the library. He moved through the dark hallway of his grandmother's house at a measured pace. He did not slam doors. He did not raise his voice. He did not put his fist through a wall, though the thought crossed his mind with a clarity that surprised him. He called his lawyer at 2:47 in the morning. "I need divorce papers filed before the week is out," he said when the call connected. "I'll explain everything at 8. Have coffee ready." He hung up before the man could answer. Outside, the night was cold and the city was quiet in the particular way that Seoul gets quiet after midnight. Not silent, never silent, but subdued, like the whole place is breathing slowly. He stood on the front steps of his grandmother's house and looked out at the street and felt, for the first time in a very long time, something he didn't recognize at first. It took him a minute to identify it. It was grief. Not the clean, manageable grief of losing someone you expected to lose. This was the other kind. The kind that ambushes you. The grief of losing something you didn't know you were losing while it was happening. The grief of standing 12 years later in the wreckage of something that could have been a life and understanding fully that the damage was not an accident. Someone had built this. Someone had decided his life should look like this. And he had walked into it because he was 17 and powerless, and had no idea that the woman sitting across from Amara Ellis with a teacup in her hand was capable of something that precise and that permanent. He went back inside and picked up the box again. There was one more thing at the bottom. He had overlooked it the first time because it was small and wrapped in a piece of cloth he'd recognized as the lining from one of his grandmother's old scarves. He unwrapped it carefully. It was a photograph, old enough to be slightly faded at the edges. 2 teenagers standing in front of a school building, him at 17, thin-shouldered and trying to look older than he was, and Amara beside him, laughing at something just off camera, her hand resting on his arm with the casual ease of someone who didn't need to think about the gesture. He remembered that day. He remembered what she had been laughing at, something his friend Marcus had said, something stupid and funny, and she had laughed and leaned into him slightly, and the weight of her hand on his arm had felt like the most real thing in his entire complicated life. On the back of the photograph, his grandmother had written 2 words. Fix it. He did not sleep that night. He sat in his car and had his driver take him home through the long way around the city, and he looked out the window at the streets and thought about Amara Ellis, the way he hadn't let himself think about her in years. Not as a memory he had carefully managed, but as a real person who had been 18 years old and pregnant and terrified and alone, and had reached out to him over and over across thousands of miles of silence and received nothing back. Not nothing. Worse than nothing. A lie designed to make her feel abandoned. He thought about what she must have believed, that he was indifferent, that he had moved on easily, that he had heard about the pregnancy and decided it was inconvenient, that the months they had spent together, the conversations, the plans, the stupid, innocent certainty that what they had was going somewhere real had meant less to him than he had let on. He thought about her reading that message. He thought about what she must have felt. He pressed his thumb against the inside of his wrist, where the bracelet had sat so long ago that the skin there had its own memory of it. He had kept the bracelet. He had kept it in a locked drawer in his private office for 12 years, which was embarrassing in a way he had never fully examined. He had told himself it was just a physical object, that keeping it didn't mean anything. He understood now what it meant. It meant he had never actually let go. He had just convinced himself he had, because the alternative, holding on to something irretrievable, seemed like a weakness he couldn't afford. The car pulled up to the gate of his house. The lights were on in the east wing. Su Min was still awake, which was unusual for this hour. He sat in the car for a moment without moving. His driver waited. "Keep driving," Jae-won said quietly. The car pulled back into the street. He thought about his grandmother's words, the ones she had said to him 3 weeks before she died, when he had sat beside her hospital bed and held her hand and pretended he was holding himself together better than he was. She had looked at him with eyes that had seen too much and said, in the plainest possible voice, a person should never spend a lifetime protecting a life they never wanted. He had deflected it at the time. Said something about obligations and family and the nature of the choices he had made. She had not argued with him. She had just looked at him. Now he understood what that look meant. It meant she had known. She had known for years. She had sat on the truth his grandmother had been protecting, out of fear, out of misguided protection, out of the particular paralysis that comes from knowing something that could destroy everything and being unsure if destruction is the right answer. And she had waited until the last possible moment to let it go. He didn't blame her entirely. He understood the calculation. He had made similar ones himself. But the result of that calculation was 12 years. 12 years of Amara Ellis living with a lie. 12 years of him living inside a marriage that had been built on the ruins of something real. He pulled out his phone and opened the browser. He typed in the only search he knew to start with. Her name, her city, what she had studied, what she had wanted to do with her life when she was 18 years old, and still believed the future was going to be kind to her. The results came back slowly. He scrolled through them in the back of the car while the city moved past the windows. She was in Chicago. She worked with a nonprofit that provided legal aid to families in housing crisis. There was a photograph in a local news article from 2 years earlier. She was standing outside a courthouse with a group of colleagues, arms crossed, looking directly at the camera with an expression that was composed and professional and completely unreadable. She looked like someone who had learned to be careful. He studied the photograph for longer than he should have. He thought about what he was going to do. He thought about what he was going to say. He thought about the fact that he was Kang Jae-won, a man who had sat across tables from people who wanted him dead, and kept his hands still and his voice flat and his expression giving away nothing. And the thought of walking toward Amara Ellis across any distance at all made something in his chest go unsteady in a way that no amount of discipline could seem to correct. He had built an empire. He had not built a single thing inside himself that could prepare him for this. His phone buzzed. A message from his head of security. Standard overnight check-in, nothing urgent. He typed back, "Set up a trip to Chicago. Keep it private. 2 weeks from now." Then he put the phone in his jacket pocket and looked out the window and thought about a girl standing outside a school building, laughing at something just off camera, her hand resting on his arm like she never had to think about it. He had been 17 years old. He had thought he had his whole life in front of him. He had been right about that part. He had just been wrong about what kind of life it would turn out to be. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside the car, Kang Jae-won sat very still and understood, for the first time in 12 years, exactly what he had lost, and exactly who had taken it from him. 2 weeks. That was how long he gave himself to get his footing before Chicago. It was not enough time. He knew that before the first week was out. But he was Kang Jae-won, and Kang Jae-won did not ask for more time. He made decisions, and he moved inside them, and he dealt with whatever came after. That was the only way he had ever known how to operate. The divorce filing landed on Soo-min's lawyer's desk on a Tuesday morning. Chae-won was not in the house when she found out. He had moved himself to the secondary residence the night before, a smaller place on the other side of the city that he kept for business guests, clean and impersonal and completely free of anything that reminded him of the last 12 years. He had packed one bag. He had not looked back at the house as the car pulled out of the gate. His phone started ringing at 9:43 in the morning. He let it go to voicemail 4 times before he picked up. "You're doing this now," Soo-min said. Not a question. Her voice was controlled in the way that very angry people get controlled, every syllable placed with a precision that was its own kind of violence. "After the funeral, while you're still grieving, you're doing this now. The timing isn't about grief. Then what is it about?" He looked out the window of the secondary residence. The street below was quiet. A woman was walking a small dog. A delivery truck was double-parked 2 buildings down. Normal things. The world not caring at all about what was happening inside this room. "You know what it's about," he said. A pause. Longer than it should have been. That pause told him everything he needed to know about whether she understood what he had found. "I don't know what you think you've discovered," she said carefully. "Don't do that." "Chae-won, I said don't do that." He kept his voice level. "Don't perform confusion at me. You're too intelligent for it, and I'm too tired for it. We both know what this is." Another pause. He heard her breathing shift, just slightly, just enough. "Whatever your grandmother left you," she said, "you need to understand that old women remember things wrong. They keep things for the wrong reasons. They assign meaning where there isn't." She kept printouts, Soo-min. He said it quietly. "Email chains, dated, your address in the header, clear as anything." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. It had weight. He could feel it through the phone. "I want you out of the main house by the end of the month," he said. "Keep whatever you came into the marriage with. My lawyers will be reasonable. Don't make them be otherwise." He hung up before she could find her footing again. He set the phone face down on the table and sat there for a moment with his hands flat on the surface and his eyes on the middle distance. His chest was doing the thing it had been doing since the night in the library. That low, persistent pressure, like something was sitting on it that he couldn't shift. He had not slept more than 4 hours any night since. He was not a man who fell apart. He had been in rooms with people who wanted him dead. He had made decisions that cost people things they couldn't get back. He had built an organization from the wreckage of his father's mistakes and had done it through discipline and ruthlessness and an absolute refusal to let his emotions run faster than his thinking. None of that felt particularly useful right now. He picked up the photograph from the table, the one his grandmother had kept, the one with Amara laughing just slightly off frame, and looked at it for a moment. Then he set it back down and went to make coffee because he needed something to do with his hands. The meeting with his senior lieutenants that afternoon was supposed to be routine: quarterly review, distribution logistics, the ongoing issue with the Incheon Port Authority contact who had started asking for a larger cut. It was not routine. Park Sung-jin, his second-in-command, and the closest thing he had to a friend inside the organization, arrived 15 minutes early and closed the door behind him with the specific kind of deliberateness that meant he wanted to talk before the others arrived. Sung-jin was 51 years old and had been inside the Baekryong syndicate since before Jae-won was old enough to drive. He had sharp, watchful eyes and a stillness about him that most people mistook for patience. It wasn't patience, it was calculation. "I heard about the divorce filing," Sung-jin said. "News travels." "It always does." He sat down across from Jae-won and folded his hands on the table. "The board is going to have questions. The board can ask them. They're going to ask them loudly." Sung-jin studied him for a moment. "Soo-min's father still controls 3 of our primary import channels. You know what a split looks like to the men who depend on those channels staying open." "I know exactly what it looks like." "Then you know this is going to create instability." "Everything creates instability," Jae-won said. "The question is whether the instability is worth it. This one is." Sungjin was quiet for a moment. This is about something you found at your grandmother's estate. It wasn't a question. Sungjin rarely asked questions when he already knew the answer. Yes, Chaewon said. Something about the woman from before. The American. Chaewon looked at him. How long have you known something happened? I didn't know what happened. I knew something happened. The way Soo Min behaved the first year of your marriage, the level of control she needed, the monitoring, the way she reacted whenever anyone mentioned your time in America. That's not normal jealousy. Sungjin's jaw was tight. I didn't push because it wasn't my place, and because I was afraid of what you'd do if you knew. You should have pushed. Maybe. Not maybe. You should have pushed. Sungjin accepted that without argument, which was the right response. What are you going to do? I'm going to Chicago in 2 weeks. A pause. To do what? To tell her the truth. Sungjin looked at him for a long time. There was something in his expression that wasn't quite skepticism and wasn't quite concern. Something more complicated than either. She's been living with this for 12 years, he said finally. Whatever you go there to say, she may not want to hear it. I know. It might make things worse. I know that too. Then why? Because she deserves to know the truth. Chaewon said it simply, without heat. Not for me. For her. She spent 12 years believing I abandoned her. She deserves to know that's not what happened. What she does with it after that is her choice. But she doesn't get to keep living inside a lie if I have the power to correct it. Sungjin was quiet again. Outside the room, they could hear the other lieutenants arriving, voices low in the corridor. Be careful, Sungjin said finally. Not of her. Of Soo Min. She's not going to let this go quietly. She doesn't have a choice. She always thinks she has a choice. Sungjin stood up and straightened his jacket. That's what makes her dangerous. Soo Min called again that evening. He didn't answer. She texted twice after that. Controlled, careful messages that didn't say anything directly, but that vibrated with the particular frequency of someone who was used to having leverage and was realizing, for the first time, that the leverage had shifted. She showed up at the secondary residence the next morning at 7:30. He heard the knock and opened the door, and they stood there looking at each other across the threshold. She was impeccably dressed, hair perfect, posture perfect. She had always understood the power of presentation, had used it like a tool her entire life. Up close, though, he could see the thing she was working to hide, a tightness around her eyes, a shallowness to her breathing that she couldn't quite control. You're not going to let me in, she said. No. She absorbed that. We need to talk properly, not through lawyers. We don't. Jaewon. She said his name the way she always said it, with a proprietary weight, like she had a claim on the sound of it. You found some papers in your grandmother's house. Old things, things that are out of context. Stop. And you were making a decision based on incomplete. I said stop. His voice was flat. Not raised, not cold in a theatrical way. Just flat. The way something goes flat when all the pretense has been removed from it. I've read everything. I understand what it means. We're done talking about whether I understand. She looked at him. Her jaw moved slightly, like she was physically closing her teeth around something she had been about to say. I did what I had to do, she said finally. The words landed in the quiet of the morning and just sat there. Say that again, he said. I was 20 years old. I was in love with you. You were about to throw everything away for a girl you'd known for 8 months, a girl your family would never accept, a girl who had no place in the life you were going to have to live. Her voice had gone tight and earnest, the mask slipping into something that was almost genuine. Almost. I made a choice. I made it because I thought I was protecting. You told a pregnant 18-year-old that I didn't want her child. His voice did not rise, did not crack, did not do anything except stay exactly where it was. You told her that as deliberately and carefully as you're talking to me right now. Don't dress it up as protection. Don't make it soft. Say what it was. Her chin lifted slightly, old reflex. I was protecting what we could be, she said. There was no we. There was never a we. There was you deciding that what you wanted was more important than 2 other people's lives. He stepped back from the door. My lawyers will contact yours. Don't come here again. He closed the door. He stood inside and listened to the silence on the other side for a long moment. He half expected her to knock again. She didn't. He heard her heels on the exterior steps, slow, controlled, not rushing. She would never let herself be seen to rush. He went back to the kitchen and poured his coffee down the drain because it had gone cold and he couldn't remember the last time he had actually wanted to drink it anyway. The next 10 days moved in a strange combination of slowness and velocity. Business kept moving. It always did. It never stopped. The organization had its own momentum that required constant management. But underneath it, like a current he was wading against, there was the constant low-grade weight of what was coming. He had his team run a full background on Amara Ellis. He knew how that sounded. He had done it anyway, because he was who he was. And because walking into that situation completely blind felt like the wrong kind of reckless. He read the report in one sitting. She had finished her degree, then law school, then spent 3 years with a Chicago firm before leaving to join the nonprofit. She was 30 years old. She had a small apartment in the Wicker Park neighborhood. She had friends, a close circle from the nonprofit, a few from law school. She wasn't married. No long-term relationship on record in the last 4 years. Before that, there had been someone, a man she'd dated for 2 years, but it had ended without drama. Nothing in the report explained what she was like to be around. Nothing told him whether she still had that laugh, whether she still pressed hard when she wrote, whether any part of her was the same person he had known. He folded the report and put it in the box with the letters. 3 days before Chicago, Sungjin called him. "Sumin had a meeting this morning," Sungjin said. He sounded careful, the way he sounded when the information was bad enough to require care. "With who?" "Kim Hyuk-soo." Chaewon was quiet for a moment. Kim Hyuk-soo ran the Chonggang Network, a rival organization that had been looking for a pressure point into Baekryong's operations for the better part of 2 years. "What kind of meeting?" "Long enough to be substantive, short enough to look casual if someone was watching who didn't know to look. She's shopping leverage. That's what it looks like." He leaned back in his chair. The particular quality of this problem was its timing. Sumin didn't have enough information to damage him structurally, but she had 12 years of proximity, which meant she had things that couldn't be filed, things that lived only in memory and relationships. If she was talking to Hyuk-soo, she was offering something: social capital, access. The appearance of an alliance that could make the divorce look like internal fragmentation to people who were waiting to see a crack. "I'll deal with it when I get back," he said. "You might need to deal with it before you go." "I'm not delaying Chicago." "I know you're not." Sungjin paused. "I'm telling you the landscape when you get back may be different than the one you're leaving." "It usually is," Chaewon said, and ended the call. He was not afraid of Sumin's move. He was not afraid of Kim Hyuk-soo. He had navigated worse from men who had more reach and fewer restraints. What sat poorly was the feeling that she was going to make everything around him loud and complicated at exactly the moment he needed to do something quiet. He thought about the photograph again, about Amara laughing at something just off camera. He thought about the fact that she didn't know he was coming. He had decided against reaching out in advance. Any message he sent would give her the opportunity to refuse. He didn't want her to refuse, not because he was going to ignore her refusal, but because he thought that if he could just stand in front of her and say the words to her face, she would at least hear them. She would at least have the truth, delivered in person, by the person who owed it to her. Whether she did anything with it after that was not his to decide. He packed the box, the letters, the email printout, the photograph, the bracelet, which he took from the locked drawer in his office and held for a moment before placing it carefully at the bottom of the box between 2 of the folded letters. He had kept it for 12 years. He had never entirely known why. He knew now. Chicago in November was a different kind of cold than Seoul. Same temperature, roughly, but the wind off the lake moved differently, horizontal and personal, like it had somewhere specific to be and you were in the way. He had forgotten that about American winters, the particular physical aggression of them. He arrived on a Thursday morning and checked into a hotel under a name his security team had arranged. He had 2 men with him, kept at a careful distance, close enough to matter, far enough to be invisible. He was not careless about security, but he was also not going to walk toward Amara Ellis flanked by people she didn't know. He had found out, through the kind of careful inquiry that his resources made possible, that she would be at a community meeting that Thursday evening, a housing advocacy event at a church hall in her neighborhood. Public. Open attendance. He had also found out that it ended at 8:30. He got to the block at 8:15 and waited across the street. This was not the entrance of a man who had everything figured out. He knew that. He was standing on a Chicago sidewalk in a wool coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and his hands, for once, were not quite steady. He was 31 years old. He ran an organization that controlled hundreds of millions of dollars in assets and employed, directly or indirectly, over 300 people. He had sat across from prosecutors and rival crime bosses and government officials and had never once felt his hands get like this. The doors of the hall opened at 8:27. People came out in small groups, still talking, pulling on coats. He watched the door. He kept watching. She came out at 8:31 with a woman he didn't recognize, both of them laughing about something. She had her head turned slightly to the side as she laughed, and the laughter was not careful or performed. It was real, the kind that catches you unexpectedly. And something in his chest performed a complicated motion that had no name in any language he spoke. She looked like herself. She looked completely different. She was 30 years old, and she had the particular bearing of someone who had learned to be comfortable in their own skin through something harder than ease. She stood straighter than she had at 18. She moved with intention. But the laugh was the same, the way her shoulders moved when she laughed. He started across the street. She didn't see him until he was about 15 feet away. The woman beside her noticed him first, some instinct maybe, the way he was walking with too much direction for a stranger. She stopped. Amara looked up, following her companion's gaze. Their eyes met. The laugh stopped. He watched her face go through 3 expressions in about 2 seconds: confusion, recognition, and then something that wasn't quite any single thing. Not anger, not relief, not fear. Something more complex that settled, after a moment, into a very controlled stillness. "Amara," he said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. She looked at him for a long moment. Her companion glanced between them, reading the room with the quick intelligence of someone who understood they had just walked into the edge of something. "I'll catch up with you," Amara said to her friend, without looking away from him. Her friend hesitated for exactly a second, then moved off with the careful tact of someone who would absolutely be texting to check in the moment she turned the corner. They were alone on the sidewalk. The cold was doing what Chicago cold does. A cab moved past. Somewhere down the block, someone was laughing. Not them. "You shouldn't be here," Amara said. Her voice was level, practice level, the kind that requires active effort. "I know." "How did you find me?" "I have resources." She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Of course you do." She looked at him, really looked, the way you look at something you've been trying not to think about. "What do you want, Jaewon?" He had been thinking about this moment for 2 weeks. He had run through versions of it. He had thought about how to say it correctly, how to get to the truth without making it about him, how to give her what she needed without making her feel like she owed him anything in return. He had prepared. Standing in front of her, all of it dissolved. "I need you to know that I didn't know," he said, "about the pregnancy. I never knew. I didn't send that message. I didn't know you reached out. I didn't know any of it until 11 days ago." Something moved across her face. She was very still. 11 days ago," she said, "my grandmother died. She left me a box. Inside it were your letters." He held her gaze. "All of them, Amara. Every one you sent." The stillness in her face cracked open, just slightly, just for a second, just enough for him to see the thing underneath it before she got it back under control. "I need you to go," she said. Her voice had changed. Still controlled, but different now, thinner. "I know you do. I'll go. But not before you've heard this, because you deserve to hear it from me, in person, and I'm not going to make you wait another 12 years for the truth." She looked at him. Her jaw was tight. Her arms had crossed over her chest. A small, involuntary gesture he recognized as something she did when she was working to hold herself together. "Say it then," she said. "Sumin wrote that letter, not me. She intercepted everything you sent. She deleted the emails from my accounts before I ever saw them. She lied to you, and she lied to me, and she built 12 years of both our lives on top of that lie." He watched her face. "I have proof. I brought it with me. You don't have to take my word for anything. It's all documented, dated, in her own words." The silence between them was the loudest thing on the street. Amara's arms tightened across her chest. She was looking at a point just past his shoulder. Not away from him, just slightly sideways, the way people look when they're trying to process something that's too large to look at directly. "I lost the baby," she said. She said it the way you say something you've said only to very specific people in very specific moments. Quiet, flat, stripped of any performance. "I know," he said. "I read, no." She looked at him directly now. "I don't mean I made a decision. I mean I lost it. There were complications. I was 19, I was alone, and there were complications, and I almost—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "I lost it. And the damage was bad enough that they couldn't promise me I'd be able to carry again." He had not known that part. The letters had not said that part. He had not found that part anywhere. He stood there on the sidewalk in Chicago in the cold and understood, for the first time and fully, the true shape of what had been taken. Not just their relationship, not just 12 years, her future, her body, her certainty about who she was going to be. "Amara," he said. His voice was not steady anymore. "I need you to go," she said again. Softer this time. Not cold. Something worse than cold. Something that sounded like a person who had already survived the worst of something and was not willing to go back into it unprepared. "I need to think. I need—" She stopped. "Leave me your number, or don't. I don't know yet." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a card. Plain, just a number, nothing else on it, and held it out to her. She looked at it for a moment before she took it. Their fingers didn't quite touch. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what it's worth after all this time. I'm sorry." She didn't say anything. She turned and walked away down the sidewalk, her coat pulled around her, her steps measured and deliberate, and she did not look back. He stood there and watched her go, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, the cold, the noise of the city, the 12 years of distance that had just collapsed into about 4 minutes of conversation, he understood what Sungjin had meant. She might not want to hear it. She had heard it. What happened next was not his to control, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, Kang Jae-won was standing in a situation where control had never been the point. She called him at 11:47 that night. He was still awake. He had not expected to sleep. I was sitting in the hotel room with the box open on the table in front of him, and a glass of water he hadn't touched, and the city outside doing what cities do at midnight. Its own business, indifferent, continuous. The phone buzzed, and her name wasn't in his contacts because he hadn't had her number to put there, but he knew from the Chicago area code, and he picked up on the second ring. "I want to see the proof," she said. No greeting, no preamble. Her voice had the particular quality of someone who had spent several hours in a room with themselves working through something difficult and had come out the other side of it into a very focused, very brittle kind of resolve. "I'll bring it wherever you want," he said. "There's a coffee place on Milwaukee Avenue. Opens at 7. I'll be there at 7:15. A pause. "Come alone. If you bring anyone with you, I'm leaving." "I'll come alone." She hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he put it down and looked at the box and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. The particular uncomfortable sensation of not knowing what was going to happen next and not having any mechanism to engineer a different outcome. He had spent his entire adult life in environments where he could control the variables, where preparation and resources and the right kind of pressure applied at the right moment could bend most situations towards something workable. He had nothing to apply here. Nothing that worked on grief that had been sitting for 12 years. Nothing that fixed what had already happened to her body. Nothing that gave back what had been taken. All he had was the truth, documented and dated, and a bracelet in the bottom of a box. He didn't know if any of it was enough. I didn't know if enough was even a concept that applied. She was already there when he arrived at 7:12, seated at a corner table, both hands wrapped around a ceramic mug, watching the door. She had dark circles under her eyes that weren't from makeup, and she was wearing a coat she hadn't taken off yet, like she hadn't fully committed to staying. He sat down across from her without being invited. A server came and he ordered coffee he didn't want because having something to do with his hands seemed like it mattered. Amara looked at him with an expression that was doing a lot of work, holding a lot of things back simultaneously. He recognized the effort because he had spent years making the same expression. "Show me," she said. He opened the box and placed the email printout on the table between them. Then the letters, in order. Then his grandmother's note card, still paper clipped to the top of the chain. She didn't touch anything at first. She just read. Her eyes moved across the pages slowly, then doubled back, then slowed again at certain parts. He watched her breathing, steady going in, not quite as steady coming out. Her jaw tightened at one point and then deliberately relaxed, the way you consciously control a muscle that's trying to do something on its own. She got to the email chain. She read it twice. He could tell she read it twice because her eyes went back to the top after the first pass and the second pass was slower. She set it down. She picked up her coffee and took a sip and set it back down and did not look at him for a moment. She wrote this herself, Amara said. Statement, not question. Yes. From her own account. Yes. And she delivered the letter to me by hand. Her voice was very flat. She sat across from me and watched me read it, and she knew exactly what it said because she wrote it. Yes. Amara set both hands flat on the table. It was a deliberate gesture, the kind you make when you need something solid under your palms. She looked at the email chain again without picking it up. I believed her, she said. I want you to know that I believed her completely. She cried. She acted like she was sorry to have to tell me. She held my hand. She looked up at him. She held my hand while she was doing it. He had nothing to say to that. There was nothing adequate. I spent 12 years thinking you knew, Amara continued. Her voice was still flat, but something underneath it was under significant pressure. 12 years thinking that you heard about the pregnancy and decided it wasn't your problem. That everything we talked about, everything you said to me about the future, about wanting something different from your family's life, that all of it was just something you said. She exhaled. I rebuilt myself around that. The story I told myself about who I was and what I deserved and why I needed to be careful about people, all of it was built on the assumption that you knew and chose to leave. I know. No. She shook her head slightly. You don't know what that does to a person. You can understand it intellectually, but you don't know. You're right, he said. I don't. She looked at him for a long moment. He held the look without flinching, because she had earned the right to look at him however she needed to. Why did your grandmother keep this from you? She asked. For 6 years, you said. She had this for 6 years. She was afraid of what I'd do to Sue Min. And what would you have done? He didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't know, but because the honest answer required him to be honest. I don't know exactly, he said. But my grandmother did know, and she was probably right to be afraid. Something shifted in Amara's expression. Not softening, not closing off. Something more complicated, like she was recalibrating. So she waited until she was dying, Amara said. She waited until she thought I was ready to do something with it besides burn everything down. And are you ready to do something with it? I filed for divorce before I came here, he said. That part's already done. She absorbed that. I'm not going to be the reason you blew up your marriage. You're not. She is. What she did is. He met her eyes. I wouldn't have stayed in it regardless. You need to understand that. I'm not here because I need something from you, or because I'm trying to replace one situation with another. I came here because you had a right to know the truth. Whatever you do with it is yours. Amara looked at him for a long time. Then she looked down at the papers on the table. Then she looked at her coffee. I don't know what to do with this, she said finally. Quiet. The flatness gone, replaced with something that sounded more like the actual weight of it. I've been angry at you for 12 years. I had it organized. I had a whole system for it. She made a small, humorless sound. And now you're sitting here telling me the anger was pointed at the wrong person and I have to, what, redirect it after 12 years? I'm not telling you what to do with it. I know you're not. She picked up her coffee again. Her hands weren't entirely steady. That's almost worse. They sat with that for a moment. Outside, Milwaukee Avenue was waking up. A bus went past, a delivery truck, a man in a heavy jacket walking a dog that did not want to be walking. The complications, he said carefully, after the loss. How are you now, physically? She looked at him sharply, like she was deciding whether that question had the right to exist. Uncertain, she said finally. That's the word they use. I'm uncertain. There's damage that may or may not affect my ability to carry a pregnancy. I won't know until I try, and I haven't been in a situation where trying was something I wanted to think about. He nodded. He didn't say he was sorry again, because he had already said it and she had already received it, and saying it again would be for him and not for her. She looked at the bracelet still sitting in the bottom of the box. She had been avoiding looking at it since he opened the box, which told him she had noticed it immediately. Is that? She stopped. Yes. She reached out and picked it up. She turned it over in her fingers. It was a simple thing, braided cord, a small silver charm she had bought at a street market when they were 16. She had given it to him as a joke about something he couldn't even remember now, some bet she'd won, or some argument she'd made that turned out to be right. He had worn it for the last 2 months they were together and had kept it in his pocket on the flight back to Korea and had never been able to bring himself to put it anywhere that felt permanent until 12 years later he had put it in a drawer and locked it, because keeping it where he could see it every day had started to feel like a specific kind of punishment he was administering to himself. You kept this, she said. Yes. Why? It wasn't a question either. It was the kind of statement that expects the truth. I don't know that I could fully explain it, he said. I thought I'd moved on. I was wrong about that. The bracelet was evidence of me being wrong, but I kept it anyway because getting rid of it felt like the last lie I wasn't willing to tell myself. She set it back down on the table between them. Not back in the box. Between them. She looked at it for a moment, then she looked at him. I need time, she said. You can have whatever you need. I don't know if that means I want to talk to you again. I genuinely don't know that yet. I understand. But I needed to see this. She gestured at the papers. I needed to know it was real, that I wasn't... She stopped. I spent a long time wondering if I'd misjudged you, if the person I thought you were at 17 was something I'd invented, and then I decided the wondering was more painful than just accepting the version that made sense, and I stopped wondering. She picked up the bracelet again, briefly, then set it down. Turns out I hadn't misjudged you. I'd been misjudged by someone else's interference. Yes. That's... She let out a slow breath. That's a lot to sit with. I know. She stood up. She was putting her coat more firmly on, the gesture of someone who needs to be in motion. He stood too, because sitting while she stood felt wrong. Don't call me, she said. I'll call you if I decide I want to talk more. Okay? She picked up the bracelet again, and this time she didn't set it down. She held it in her closed fist for a moment, looking at him. I'm not ready to forgive you, she said. I know logically that you didn't do it, but I spent 12 years with the feelings built on the assumption that you did, and feelings don't update as fast as logic does, so I'm not there yet. I want you to know I'm not there yet. I'm not asking you to be. She nodded once, short and tight. Then she turned and walked out of the coffee shop into the cold Chicago morning. He sat back down and looked at the papers on the table and the empty space where the bracelet had been and drank his coffee, which had gone cold. He should have flown back to Seoul that afternoon. He had business waiting. Sungjin had sent 3 messages. His lawyers needed responses. The meeting with the board about the divorce's structural implications had been pushed twice and couldn't be pushed a third time. He extended his hotel stay by 4 days without entirely knowing why. He told himself it was to give her time. To be in the same city in case she called, in case she wanted to see the documentation again, in case she had questions he needed to answer in person rather than across 12 time zones. He spent the 4 days doing very little. He walked along the lake, which was aggressive and gray in November, the wind coming off it with the kind of physicality that made you feel like you were being told something. He ate in places where nobody knew him. He called Sungjin once a day to handle the most urgent operational matters and ignored everything that could wait. On the 3rd day, she called. I've been looking at the email chain, she said. No greeting, same as before. I know a lawyer who does forensic document analysis. I want to have her look at it. Can I get a copy? I'll have my team send you the complete digital file. The original documents will be available whenever you want them. Okay. A pause. She confirmed to me, your Soo-min, what she did. He went still. When? She called me. Last night. I don't know how she got my number. Amara's voice was careful and controlled, but he could hear the agitation beneath it, the same way you hear a current beneath still water. She told me she wanted to explain herself. I told her I didn't want to hear it. She explained herself anyway. What did she say? She said she made a choice she thought was necessary. She said the relationship wasn't going to survive your family regardless. She said, Amara paused. He could hear her breathing for a moment. She said that I should have known better than to think a Kong would build a life with someone outside their world. He felt something move through him that was not quite anger and not quite anything he had a clean word for. Where are you right now? He said. My apartment. Is she there? In Chicago? I don't know. She called. She didn't say where from. Another pause. Jaewon. She wasn't apologizing. I want to be clear about that. She was calling to tell me that even if I had the proof, it didn't matter. That you were going back to Korea after this, that the divorce would settle, and that you and I were a footnote that was done 12 years ago and was still done now. He was already moving, sir, reaching for his jacket, signaling toward the door. She's trying to destabilize you, he said. She wants you uncertain. She wants you to decide it's not worth it before you've had the chance to decide anything. I know what she's doing, Amara's voice sharpened. I'm a lawyer. I understand manipulation tactics. I'm telling you because I think you need to know she's here, or she's close, and she is not done. I'll handle it. I don't want you to handle it on my behalf. I want you to handle it because she's a problem for you regardless of what happens between us. A beat. I need you to understand the difference. I understand the difference. She hung up. He was already in the hallway, jacket half on, calling his security lead before the elevator arrived. Find out if Sumin Park flew to the U.S. in the last 72 hours. Start with Chicago arrivals and work out from there. The answer came back in 23 minutes. She had landed at O'Hare 2 days ago. She was staying at the Four Seasons on East Delaware. She had made no contact with his security detail, which meant she hadn't announced herself, which meant this was not a conversation she wanted witnessed. He thought about what she was doing. He understood the architecture of it. She was here to apply direct pressure to the one variable in this situation that was outside his control. She couldn't threaten him. She couldn't threaten the organization without destroying herself in the process. But she could go directly to Amara and work the angle that the relationship was impossible anyway, that Jaewon was a temporary disruption to Amara's rebuilt life, that the smarter move was to close the door before it got any heavier. It was honestly the move he would have made. That recognition sat poorly. He had his driver take him to the Four Seasons. He had not called ahead. He did not call her room. He had the front desk send up a message, his name, and the words lobby, now. And he sat in one of the lobby chairs and waited, because he was done letting her set the terms of any conversation between them. She came down in 14 minutes. She was dressed for it, fully put together, the way she was always fully put together, like being undone in any visible way was a failure she would not allow herself. She walked toward him and sat down across from him with the composure of someone who had been preparing for this confrontation. You got here fast, she said. You called Amara. I did. From Chicago, where I happened to be. He studied her face. You had me followed. I had your travel monitored. There's a difference. There isn't. She crossed her legs and folded her hands in her lap and looked at him with an expression that was doing an impressive amount of work. Part defiance, part something older and more complicated. I wanted her to understand the situation clearly, Sumin said. You wanted her frightened. I wanted her realistic. That's the same thing. She held his gaze. What do you think is going to happen, Jaewon? You show up here with a box of old papers and suddenly 12 years disappear? She rebuilds her life around you? You restructure your entire organization to become a man who's appropriate for her world? The composure had thinned slightly, not cracked, but visible underneath. You're a Kang. You run a criminal syndicate. You live in a world that does not bend to sentimentality. Nothing you feel for that woman changes what you are. I know what I am, he said. I've always known. The difference is, I'm done letting what I am be something other people decided for me. He leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive, precise. You called her to scare her off. You're here because you're scared, not of losing the marriage. You never wanted the marriage, you wanted the position. You're scared because if I restructure the organization, if I legitimize the business interests the way I've been planning, the position becomes worth less, and you lose the leverage that's kept you relevant in a room full of people who never actually respected you. Something moved across her face. Not pain, something colder. You don't, she started. You've been talking to Kim Hyuk-soo, he said. Sung-jin told me. You're shopping an alliance with Changgang because you think it gives you a fallback when the divorce settles. He watched her. Here's the thing about that. Yuxu doesn't want an alliance. He wants information. He's going to use whatever you give him and leave you with nothing but the legal exposure. He's not your fallback. He's your last mistake. The composure fractured, just barely. A tightening around the eyes, a shift in the way she was holding her shoulders. You can't prove I've spoken to him, she said. Her voice was quieter. I don't need to prove it. I need you to understand that I know, which changes what your lawyers are going to find when they look at the settlement terms. He stood up. We're done here. Go back to Seoul. Deal with the lawyers. Stop calling Amara Ellis. He was 3 steps away when she said it. She's not the only one who lost a pregnancy. He stopped. He turned around slowly. Sumin was looking at him with an expression he had never seen on her face. Not triumph, not manipulation, something rawer than either. The first year of our marriage, she said. You were in Busan for 6 weeks dealing with the Incheon situation. I was 8 weeks along when I lost it. I didn't tell you because it was early and you were somewhere else even when you were in the room, and I knew it wasn't going to help either of us. She held his gaze. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that I am not the simple villain you've organized the story around. He stood very still. He thought about the first year of the marriage, the distance between them, the way they had already settled into a mutual arrangement of polite avoidance. He thought about her in that enormous house alone for 6 weeks while he was in Busan. He did not feel sorry for her in the way she perhaps wanted him to. He felt something more complicated. The unwelcome recognition that people who do terrible things are not always doing them from a place of emptiness. Sometimes they're doing them from a place of pain that became something else. That recognition didn't change what she had done. It didn't make Amara's 12 years less real, but it complicated the simple shape of the story he had been carrying. I'm sorry that happened to you, he said. He meant it, completely, without qualification. I'm still filing for divorce. I'm still going to tell Amara the truth. Those things don't change. She nodded. Once. Short. Like she hadn't actually expected them to change. Like she had told him the truth, not as leverage, but just because she was tired of being only the villain in a story that was more complicated than that. Go home, Sumin, he said quietly. Deal with the lawyers. Build something that's yours. He walked out of the lobby. Outside, the wind off the lake hit him in the face, and the city kept moving and his phone was already buzzing with the next thing that needed his attention. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment without answering it. Sumin had called Amara from Chicago, had told her the relationship was a footnote, had shown up uninvited on a sidewalk in a city that wasn't hers to apply pressure to the one soft point in a situation she was losing. But there was a second call, one he hadn't accounted for. One his security team had flagged only now, attached to the activity report that had come in while he was in the lobby. The flag was on a number that had tried to reach Amara's cell in the 90 minutes since she had hung up with him. It wasn't Sumin's number. It was registered to a shell company with Chonggang's fingerprints on the paperwork. Kim Hyuk-soo wasn't just receiving information from Sumin. He had decided to reach out to Amara directly, which meant he had her number, which meant this had already gone further than a leverage play against the divorce settlement. Hyuk-soo was looking at Amara Ellis not as a complication in a business dispute, but as a pressure point. The kind of pressure point you apply directly when you want someone to move faster than they're comfortable moving. He called Sungjin. Hyuk-soo made contact with Amara, he said the moment the call connected. Get me everything on what he's planning, and get 2 of our best people on the ground in Chicago in the next 3 hours. Not visible, not intrusive, but there. Already? Sungjin said. Already, Jaewon confirmed. And Sungjin, she doesn't know they're there. She made it clear she's not accepting help she didn't ask for, but I'm not leaving her unprotected while I figure out how far this has gone. A brief silence on Sungjin's end. You know, if she finds out you had people watching her without asking her, I know exactly what happens, Jaewon said. I'm making the call anyway. He hung up and looked out at the gray lake and understood, with the cold clarity of someone who had just watched a situation change shape in real time, that whatever careful, respectful, give her space approach he had been trying to take had just run out of room. Hyuk-soo had put Amara in the picture, which meant the picture was no longer safe for her, which meant the next move was not going to be gentle, and it was not going to be on his terms, And every instinct he had, every trained, hardened, methodically developed instinct, was telling him that the window for doing this quietly had just closed. He called Amara before he made it back to the car. She picked up on the third ring. Background noise behind her, her apartment, the particular texture of indoor quiet that has a street underneath it. "Have you gotten any calls in the last 2 hours from a number you didn't recognize?" he said. A pause, short enough to be significant. "One," she said. "I didn't answer it." "Good. Don't. Not from unknown numbers until I tell you it's clear." "What's happening?" "The man Sumin has been talking to, but he's not just her backup plan. He's using her to get closer to you." "To me?" Her voice went flat. "Why would he care about me?" "Because you're the most direct line of pressure on me right now, and he knows it." He got into the car and pulled the door shut. The city noise cut off. "He's not going to threaten you physically. That's not his method. He's going to make contact, appear helpful, and try to gather enough information to use against me in negotiations I haven't started yet. You're a variable he's trying to understand." Silence on her end. He could hear her thinking in it, that specific, careful quality she had when she was processing something quickly. "So I'm a chess piece," she said. "He's trying to make you one. I'm trying to stop that." "By telling me?" "Yes. Not by putting people outside my building without telling me." He said nothing. The pause stretched. "Jaewon." Her voice was controlled and precise in the way of someone exercising great effort to keep it that way. "Do you have people watching my apartment right now?" "No." "True. They weren't there yet. They were 3 hours out." "Are you planning to?" He could deflect. He was very good at deflecting. He had been doing it professionally for over a decade. He looked out the car window at the city moving past and decided, with the particular clarity of a man who had already lost too much to lies, including the ones he'd told himself, that he was not going to start lying to her now. "Yes," he said. The silence that followed had a different quality. Denser. "Cancel it," she said. "Amara, cancel it, or I will not speak to you again. That is not a negotiating position. That is the only position I have." Her voice hadn't risen. It was almost worse that it hadn't risen. "I have spent 12 years rebuilding autonomy over my own life. I will not have someone surveilling me without my consent regardless of the reason. Not even a good reason. Not even a reason I understand. Cancel it." He looked at the space between the front seats of the car. He thought about Hyuk-soo's number and the shell company and the reach it implied. "If something happens to you because I canceled it," he said, "that's my risk to take." "I'm not sure I accept that." "You don't get to not accept it. It's my life." Her breathing had changed, still controlled, but with effort. "I am not a person in your organization. I'm not under your protection. I'm a woman you used to know who has been sitting with the worst 12 hours of her adult life, and I am asking you to respect one boundary. 1. Cancel the surveillance." He pressed his thumb against his palm. Old habit. Something to push against when he needed to stay still. "I'll cancel the physical surveillance," he said. "I'm keeping a digital alert on the number that called you. If it calls again, I find out. That's the compromise." Another pause, shorter this time. "Fine," she said, tightly. "I need you to know this isn't me controlling you. I need you to understand the difference between what Soo-min did and what I know the difference," she said. "I'm still setting the boundary. Both things are true." He called off the Chicago team. It was, he thought, possibly the most difficult order he had given anyone in recent memory, and he had given orders in rooms where the stakes involved people's lives and the organization's survival. That recognition told him something about the state he was in that he didn't entirely have room to examine. The call from Sungjin came 40 minutes later. He was back at the hotel. He had ordered food he was not going to eat. He was sitting at the table with the empty box in front of him, the letters back inside it, the bracelet gone now, wherever Amara had taken it. "Hyuk-soo isn't playing the angle you think he's playing," Sungjin said. He sounded the way he sounded when the information was worse than expected, which was a specific register Jaewon had learned to identify precisely. "He's not after leverage for a negotiation. He moved on 2 of our Incheon contacts this morning. Both of them have gone quiet. One of them sent a message to our operations coordinator that looked like routine scheduling, but the timing and the phrasing—" "He's been turned," Jaewon said. "That's what it looks like. And if the Incheon contact has been turned, Hyuk-soo already has inside access to the port schedule for the next 6 weeks. He doesn't need to negotiate. He's been building to move while my attention was here. The specific clarifying cold of understanding something fully and immediately moved through him. The divorce, Chicago, Amara, the board meeting that had been pushed twice. Every disruption of the past 2 weeks had kept his attention fragmented, kept Sung-jin managing the day-to-day while Jae-won was across an ocean handling something personal. It was not coincidence. Soo-min's approach to Hyuk-soo had not been initiated by her. It had been the other way around. Hyuk-soo had found Soo-min, had identified her dissatisfaction, her anger, her sudden vulnerability, and had fed the situation deliberately, encouraged her to file her own countermotions, encouraged her to follow Jae-won to Chicago, kept his attention pointed at the personal crisis, while the operational crisis was being constructed underneath. When did you first hear about the Cheonggang contact with Soo-min? Jae-won asked. I told you 3 days ago. When did you first suspect it? A beat. A week before that. Why didn't you tell me a week before that? Because you were at your grandmother's estate and you just found... Sung-jin stopped. I made a judgment call. You made a wrong judgment call. Yes. How bad is the Incheon situation? If both contacts have been turned, Hyuk-soo can reroute enough product in the next 30 days to undercut our Western distribution network. Not catastrophically, but enough to make the board nervous and enough to make our clients start taking his calls. Sung-jin's voice was flat with the effort of saying the next part. If the board sees the divorce, the international travel, and a distribution disruption in the same quarter, they'll ask whether I'm still capable of running the organization. Yes. He stood up from the table. He moved to the window. Chicago spread out below him, enormous and indifferent, and he looked at it and understood that his entire carefully constructed timeline had just collapsed. He needed to be in Seoul, tonight, if possible. Tomorrow, at the absolute latest. He needed to be in the room with his board before Hyuk-soo's people got there first. He needed Incheon contained, the turned contacts neutralized, and enough stability demonstrated to keep the organization from fractioning under the pressure of visible leadership disruption. He had a flight at 9 the next morning. He needed to be on it. He called Amara. She answered on the second ring, which surprised him. I have to leave tomorrow morning, he said. Earlier than I planned. There's a situation at home that I can't manage from here. Okay, she said. Careful, neutral. I don't want you to think that means I know what it means and doesn't mean, she said. You don't have to manage my interpretation. He stopped. Right. Okay. Is it serious, the situation? Yes. Are you in danger? The question landed strangely. He wasn't used to people asking that. The people in his world assumed risk was constant and didn't ask. Everyone else didn't know enough to ask. Operational danger, not physical. He paused. Probably. Okay. A beat. Be careful. He held the phone for a moment. I'll reach out when I'm back. I know. He waited to hear what she would say next, or whether she would say anything. There was a moment of quiet, not empty, something inhabited. And then she said quietly, I sat with the bracelet for an hour. He didn't say anything. I don't know what I'm doing, she said. I want you to know that I genuinely don't know what I'm doing with any of this. But I sat with it for an hour and I thought about you keeping it for 12 years, and I thought about what kind of person does that. She stopped. I don't have a conclusion. I just wanted you to know that I did that. Thank you, he said. It was inadequate. He said it anyway. She hung up. He booked the earliest available flight and told his team they were wheels up at 6:45. Then he sat in the hotel room and did not sleep, which had become something of a pattern. Seoul was gray and cold and moving at its usual compressed velocity when the car brought him in from the airport. He had slept 2 hours on the plane and felt it in every part of himself. The specific, grinding exhaustion that sits behind the eyes and in the back of the shoulders and makes everything slightly less precise than it needs to be. He had 4 hours before the board meeting. He used them. Sung-jin met him at the operations center, a private office building in Gangnam that served as the Baekryong Syndicate's administrative core, entirely legitimate on its face, the kind of place where lawyers and accountants moved through hallways, and the work that happened in the lower floors was not on any filing. Sungjin had a full briefing ready. He walked Chaewon through it in 40 minutes. The Incheon contacts, the rerouting scheme, the board members who had already been approached by Hyuk-soo's intermediaries. 3 of the 9 board members had taken meetings with Cheonggang representatives. 3. In 10 days. While Jaewon was in Chicago. Who authorized those meetings? Jaewon said. No one. They were personal. Off record. Sungjin's jaw was tight. Technically, no rule was broken. Who? Sungjin named 3 names. Jaewon knew them all. 2 were old enough to have served under his father. Men who believed stability was the highest value and who would interpret any disruption in leadership, personal or professional, as a signal to hedge. The 3rd was younger, ambitious, the kind of man who watched which way a situation was moving and positioned himself accordingly. Set up private meetings with all 3 before the board session, Jaewon said. Separately, I'll talk to each of them. You have 4 hours. Then I'll talk fast. The first meeting was with the oldest board member, a man named Kwon, who had white hair and the kind of face that had learned not to give anything away across 6 decades of the kind of life that required it. He sat across from Jaewon in a small conference room and folded his hands on the table with the patience of someone who has survived enough cycles of crisis to know they end. I heard you were in America, Kwon said. I was. Personal matter. Yes. Kwon looked at him. The Incheon situation is being handled. Hyuk-soo made certain claims about the stability of leadership. Kwon said it evenly. No accusation in it, just the information laid out flat. He suggested the divorce and the extended absence represented a pattern worth watching. He suggested that because it was useful for him to suggest it, not because it's true. Chaewon held Kwon's gaze. I've run this organization for 2 years without a significant structural failure. The Incheon breach happened because someone on the inside was compromised. That's an operations failure I'm taking responsibility for. It's also being addressed in the next 48 hours. The divorce is a personal matter that has no structural impact on the organization's function. He paused. I need to know if Hyuk-soo offered you anything specific. Kwon was quiet for a moment, then, access to the Busan Southern routes. In exchange for what? Information about our succession structure. Chaewon looked at the table for a moment, then back at Kwon. Did you give him anything? No? Kwon said it simply. I am 81 years old. I have watched 4 men run this organization. I don't make decisions based on one disrupted quarter. He paused. But I took the meeting because I wanted to understand what he was building. And what he's building is not a negotiation. He's building a case that you are distracted and therefore weak and therefore the timing is right. He looked at Chaewon directly. He is not wrong that the timing is right. He is wrong that you are weak. Those are different things. Yes, Chaewon said. They are. The 2nd and 3rd meetings were faster and less nuanced. The younger board member tried to frame his Cheonggang meeting as diligence. Jaewon let him finish the explanation and then laid out, quietly and specifically, exactly what Hyuk-soo was attempting and what the cost to every person in the room would be if Cheonggang succeeded in the Incheon reroute. He didn't threaten. He didn't need to. He just made the math visible, which was usually enough. He walked into the board meeting 40 minutes later running on 2 hours of sleep and the particular focused energy of someone who has decided that exhaustion is a variable they're no longer accounting for. The meeting lasted 3 hours. He held the room. It cost him, physically, in the way that sustained performance always costs when the body is running below capacity. By the end of it, his shoulders ached, and there was a persistent pressure behind his left eye that he recognized as the precursor to a headache he was not going to have time to address. But the room held. The 3 wavering members did not push back on his operational plan for Incheon. The succession question that Hyuk-soo had tried to plant, the implication that the divorce might create a power vacuum, was addressed directly enough that it lost its oxygen. He was not done. He had the Incheon situation still to handle, and the turned contacts, and the question of what exactly Hyuk-soo thought his next move was. He got the answer to that last question at 11:30 that night. Sungjin called. He was driving back to the secondary residence. He had not returned to the main house and was not going to. Hyuk-soo made a public statement, Sungjin said. He held a dinner, invited 12 people who matter, and he made it known that he considers the Baekryong leadership situation, his words, Transitional. Transitional. He also made it known that he is aware of certain personal history involving the leadership and an American national, and that this history suggests, again, his words, that the current head of Baekryong has priorities that may not align with the organization's long-term stability. The car was quiet for a moment. He's bringing Amara into it, Jaewon said. He's using her as a character argument. He's not naming her, but the implication is clear enough to anyone in that room. Jaewon looked out the window. Seoul at midnight. The usual compressed intensity of it. Get me a meeting with Hyuk-soo, he said. Sungjin paused. Direct? Direct. Tomorrow. His location or neutral ground, I don't care, but I want to be in a room with him. That's a risk. Letting him control the narrative is a bigger one. He hung up and sat in the dark of the car and thought about Amara sitting with a bracelet for an hour, and thought about the boardroom, and thought about Hyuk-soo's dinner, and the 12 people in it, and the implications moving through the organization like a current. He thought about what his grandmother had said. A person should never spend a lifetime protecting a life they never wanted. He had spent 12 years doing exactly that. And the moment he had stopped, the moment he had filed the divorce, gotten on a plane, walked across a street in Chicago toward a woman he had kept a bracelet for, everything had accelerated. All the things that had been waiting for a crack had found one. That was, he thought, how it usually worked. The meeting with Hyuk-soo was arranged for the following evening. A restaurant in Itaewon. Public enough to be civil, private enough to be direct. Neutral ground, as agreed. Jaewon arrived first. He sat with his back to the wall, a glass of water in front of him, and waited. Hyuk-soo arrived 7 minutes late, which was its own kind of statement. He was a compact man in his mid-40s, with the kind of physical stillness that came from years of operating in rooms where the wrong movement could be misread. He sat down across from Jaewon without offering his hand, and looked at him with the steady, assessing gaze of someone taking an inventory. I appreciate you agreeing to meet, Hyuk-soo said. I didn't agree to meet. I requested a meeting. There's a difference. Hyuk-soo's expression didn't change. Either way. The Incheon contacts, Jaewon said. I want them back. I don't have them. You have the relationship. Return it, and whatever they gave you regarding our port schedule stays between us. And if I've already used it, then we have a more expensive conversation. Hyuk-soo looked at him. He picked up the water glass in front of him, looked at it, set it back down. You had a productive board meeting yesterday. I did. 3 of your members met with my people last week and came to the meeting yesterday. Jaewon met his eyes. You built something that didn't hold. I'm giving you the opportunity to acknowledge that before we go further. Hyuk-soo was quiet. The restaurant moved around them. Other tables, other conversations, the soft industry of a busy kitchen somewhere behind the walls. The woman in Chicago, Hyuk-soo said. Don't. I'm not threatening her. I want to be clear about that. Hyuk-soo's voice was measured. I'm acknowledging that I made contact in a way that was imprecise. I was working with information from a source that turned out to be emotionally motivated rather than strategically sound. Soo Min. She presented the situation as more destabilizing than it actually is, he paused. She's not a reliable source. No, Jaewon said. She isn't. I may have moved faster than the situation warranted. You may have. Jaewon leaned forward. Here's the situation as it actually is. I'm restructuring. The organization is moving toward legitimate business holdings over the next 3 years. That's not weakness. That's a long-term play that removes our exposure and increases our reach. Attacking us in this quarter is attacking something that's already in transition. You're not taking a piece of something stable. You're disrupting something that, if left alone, becomes a model worth emulating. Hyuk-soo studied him. You're offering me information about the restructuring. I'm offering you a reason to step back from a move that costs both of us more than it gains either of us. A long silence, the kind that had weight. The Incheon contacts will go quiet, Hyuk-soo said finally. Whatever they provided, consider it returned. And the narrative you were building with the board. A misunderstanding, flat. Correctable. Yes, Jaewon said, it is. They did not shake hands when they left. It was not that kind of agreement. It was the kind built on mutual acknowledgement of where the lines were. Impermanent, contingent, requiring ongoing maintenance. But it was enough. For now, it was enough. He was in the car heading back when his phone buzzed. Chicago area code. He picked up. "She's here," Amara said. Her voice had a texture he hadn't heard in it before. Controlled, but the control was working hard. "Sumin. She's outside my building. She's been there for 20 minutes. She hasn't knocked or called. She's just standing there." He felt something move through him. Not surprise. Anger, but cold rather than hot. The kind that focuses rather than scatters. "Go inside and lock your door," he said. "I'll handle it." "You're in Seoul." "I know where I am." He was already calculating. His 2 Chicago contacts were stood down, per Amara's instruction. He had a lawyer in the city, a Chicago attorney who handled his American business interests. He had other resources. "She's not threatening me," Amara said. "She's just there. Standing on the sidewalk looking up at the building. It's—" She stopped. "It's frightening in a different way than if she were threatening me. Like she's trying to unsettle me without doing anything I can point to." That's exactly what she's doing. I know what she's doing. Knowing doesn't make it less effective. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a second and thought. Then he said, "Go to your window. Tell me what you see." A pause. Movement. "She's looking up. She can probably see the light." "Let her see it." He kept his voice steady. "She wants you to feel watched. The way to take that back is to be seen deliberately. Not hiding, not reacting. Turn your light on fully. Stand there if you want to. Let her know you see her seeing you and it doesn't move you." A long pause. "That's either very smart or very theatrical," Amara said. "Little of both." He heard her move. Another pause. "She's leaving," Amara said, quieter. "Okay. Jaewon?" She stopped. He waited. "I need her to stop. I handled a lot in my life alone, but I need her to stop." "I know," he said. "She will." "How?" He looked out the car window at Seoul moving past in the dark. He thought about Soo-min on a Chicago sidewalk looking up at a lit window. And he thought about what kind of person stands on a sidewalk in a foreign city at night doing something that isn't quite a threat and isn't quite anything actionable, but is its own specific form of cruelty. He thought about the first year of the marriage and the loss she had mentioned in the lobby of the Four Seasons. He thought about the complexity of it. He thought about Amara at 18 years old alone. Complexity did not mean tolerance. "She'll stop," he said, "because I'm going to give her a reason to." He ended the call and dialed Soo-min's number. She picked up on the first ring. "You need to come back to Seoul," he said. "Tonight." "I'm not—" "Tonight, Soo-min." His voice was quiet, completely flat. "I know you're standing on a sidewalk in Wicker Park. I know you've been there for 23 minutes. I know you didn't fly to Chicago for a conversation. You flew here because you wanted her to feel afraid, and because making her afraid was the only move you had left." He paused. "Here is what happens if you don't get on a plane tonight. The email chain goes to your father's legal team tomorrow morning, not as divorce evidence, as the document it actually is, which is evidence of deliberate interference in a pregnancy and communication fraud with provable damages. You know what that costs. Get on the plane." Silence. "This isn't who I wanted to be," she said, very quietly. "I know that," he said. "Get on the plane anyway." He heard her breathing. Then, after a moment, the ambient sound of a Chicago street getting slightly louder. She was walking, moving. He sat back in the seat. His head was pounding now. The headache he'd been managing for 8 hours finally arriving in full. His hands were tired in the specific way of hands that had been holding tension for days without adequate release. His phone buzzed. "Amara. She's gone." He typed back, "I know. Get some sleep." A long pause. Then, "You should too." He looked at the message for a moment. Then he put the phone in his pocket and looked out at the city and thought about everything that was still unresolved. The Incheon rebuilding, the board, the restructuring, the long complicated process of dismantling 12 years of a life built wrong and building something different in its place. He thought about a coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue and papers laid out on a table in a woman's hands, not entirely steady, pressing flat against the surface like she needed something solid beneath them. He thought about what she had said. "I sat with it for an hour." The car pulled through the gate of the secondary residence. He got out. The night air hit him cold and clean, and the city was quieter here, just slightly, just enough. He stood there for a moment before going inside. He had done what he could do from 8,000 miles away with no sleep, and a fractured week, and an organization that had tried to fragment beneath him while his attention was elsewhere. It wasn't enough yet. But morning was 4 hours away, and there was still work to do, and Kang Jae-won had never in his life waited for a situation to resolve itself when he had hands and a mind and the specific, stubborn refusal to accept that the thing in front of him was beyond fixing. He went inside. He did not sleep. At 5:47 in the morning, his phone rang. Not Amara, not Sungjin, not his lawyers. An unknown number, Chicago area code, different from the one that had called Amara. He picked up. "Mr. Kong," said a voice he didn't recognize. Male, American, professional in the deliberate way of someone who has been told to sound professional. "My name isn't important. What's important is that I'm calling on behalf of someone who has information about Amara Ellis that you're going to want before she does." He was completely still. "What information?" he said. "The kind that changes the conversation you've been having with her." A pause. "The kind that Soo Min Park paid to have buried 12 years ago and didn't quite manage to bury completely." The cold that moved through him then was not the ordinary cold of a November morning in Seoul. "Talk," he said. And the voice on the other end of the phone began to tell him something that made everything he thought he knew about the last 12 years rearrange itself into a shape he hadn't seen coming. He listened without interrupting. The voice on the phone was careful and unhurried, the way people are when they've rehearsed what they're going to say enough times to have taken the emotion out of it. It took 11 minutes. Jae-won sat in the pre-dawn quiet of the secondary residence and did not move and did not speak, and let every word land where it was going to land. When it was done, he said, "Send me the documentation, everything, tonight. There's a cost to name it." The number was significant. He agreed to it without negotiation, which was not how he operated, but this was not a situation in which negotiation felt like the right instrument. He gave a transfer account. He ended the call. Then he sat in the chair in the dark kitchen for a long time. The documentation arrived in his secure inbox 40 minutes later, 53 pages. Scanned originals, some of them. Medical records from a private clinic in a suburb of Chicago, dated 19 years ago. A financial record showing a payment made from an account registered to a subsidiary of the Park family's holding company, made 3 days before the appointment. A letter, handwritten, that Soo Min had apparently sent to the clinic administrator. He recognized the handwriting without needing to be told, requesting that certain communications be redirected and that the patient's listed emergency contact be changed from Kang Jae-won to a name he didn't recognize. The clinic had complied. Amara had been in that clinic alone. She had put his name down as her emergency contact, had done it, he understood, out of hope more than expectation, the particular irrational hope of someone who doesn't want to believe the person they love has abandoned them. And Soo Min had removed it, had ensured that if anything went wrong, if the complications became serious, if Amara had needed someone called, the call would have gone nowhere near him. He set the phone down. "I thought about a 19-year-old girl in a clinic bed with no one's name on her emergency contact form who could actually be reached. He had not thought it was possible to feel something worse than what he had already felt in the library of his grandmother's estate. He had been wrong about that. He picked the phone back up and called Sungjin. "I need a flight to Chicago," he said. "First available. And I need you to find me a lawyer. American, family law. Someone who handles cases involving medical record tampering and financial interference in private medical decisions. Someone serious." "It's 6 in the morning," Sungjin said. "I know what time it is." A pause. "What happened?" Soo Min changed Amara's emergency contact at the clinic. When the complications happened, when things got bad, there was no one reachable. She made sure of it. He said it flat and even because those were the only registers available to him right now. "I need to know if that constitutes anything actionable." Sungjin was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular stillness of a man who has heard a great many terrible things in his life and is encountering one that still manages to be worse than expected, "I'll have the lawyer's name before you board." "Thank you." He booked the flight himself. Then he sat with the 53 pages and read every one of them again, slowly, making sure he understood every detail before he walked toward Amara Ellis with them. He thought about how to tell her. There was no good way. He knew that. He had known from the moment the voice on the phone started talking that there was no version of this conversation that wasn't going to cost her something she had already paid for in a different currency and was now going to have to pay for again in the currency of understanding what had actually happened to her. He thought about her saying, "I lost it," the flatness of those words, the history inside them. He thought about 19 years old and a clinic and no name on a form. He did not sleep. He landed in Chicago at 2:17 in the afternoon. He called her from the airport. She answered on the fourth ring, which was longer than before, and her voice had a cautious quality, not unwelcoming, but careful, like she was still deciding something. "I need to see you," he said. Something in his voice must have communicated the weight of it, because she didn't ask why. She gave him the address of her apartment and said she'd be there. He was at her door at 3:40. She opened it before he knocked. She must have heard the elevator. And she looked at him the way she'd been looking at him since that first night on the sidewalk, with that particular guarded assessment. She was in a thick sweater, hair up, the apartment behind her warm and specific and entirely her own. Books in uneven stacks, a half-empty mug on the coffee table, a blanket on the couch that had been recently used. She had built something real here, that was visible in every detail. "Come in," she said. He came in. He did not take his coat off immediately. He stood in the middle of her living room and looked at her and said, "I need to tell you something that you have the right to know. I don't know how to make it easier, and I'm not going to try. I'm just going to say it." She crossed her arms. Not defensively, more like she was holding herself together preemptively. "Okay. When you were in the clinic, after the loss, when the complications happened," he kept his eyes on hers, "you put my name down as your emergency contact." Something moved through her face, fast, then gone. "How do you know that?" "Because Sumin found out you had, and she had it changed." He said it steadily. "She paid someone at the administration level to redirect your communications and replace my name with a contact that couldn't be reached. She made sure that if anything happened to you, if you needed someone called, it didn't go to me." The room was very quiet. Amara looked at him. She looked at him for long enough that he could see her processing it. Not the logic of it. The logic arrived fast, but the full weight of what it meant. The 19-year-old girl in the clinic bed. The empty space where a name should have been. The complications. The damage. "She was in Chicago," Amara said. Her voice was completely flat. "At that time." "Yes." "She knew I was at that clinic." "Yes." "She went out of her way to—" Amara stopped. Her jaw tightened. She pressed her lips together and looked at the wall for a moment, then back at him. "I woke up after the worst of it, and there was a nurse there, and she asked me if there was anyone she could call, and I said—" She stopped again. "I said I didn't have anyone." He stood there and let that land where it was going to land. "I have the documentation," he said. "All of it. The payment records, the clinic communication, a letter she wrote to the administrator. It's actionable. I have a lawyer already looking at what can be pursued." He pulled the folded pages from his inside coat pocket and held them out to her. "But I'm not going to do anything with any of it without your permission. This happened to you. Whatever is done about it is your decision, not mine." She didn't take the pages immediately. She looked at them. Then she took them and set them on the coffee table without unfolding them. She sat down on the couch. Not a collapse, a deliberate sitting down, the kind you do when you need to be lower to the ground. He sat in the chair across from her. He waited. "How did you find out?" she said. "Someone who had the documentation reached out. Someone who had been sitting on it." "Who?" "A clinic employee, former employee. They kept copies." He paused. "I think they kept them because they knew what they'd been paid to do wasn't right, and they wanted something that proved it wasn't their idea. People do that sometimes." Amara looked at the folded pages on the table. She didn't touch them. "I have to read those." "I know. Take your time." "Not now." She shook her head slightly. "I can't read them right now." "Okay." They sat. The apartment made its small sounds, the refrigerator, a pipe somewhere in the wall, traffic from outside doing its patient, continuous thing. 19 years old, Amara said quietly. To the room more than to him. "I thought I was the most alone I had ever been. I didn't know how much more alone she was arranging for me to be." "I know." "Stop saying that." She looked at him sharply. You know intellectually. You don't know what it was. Those are different things. We already established that. You're right. He held her gaze. I was wrong to say it. She looked at him for a moment. Some of the sharpness went out of her expression. Not softening, just recalibrating. What do you want from me? She said. I need you to say it plainly. Not the careful version, the actual version. He thought about deflecting. He thought about the careful version, the responsible framing, the I don't need anything, this is for you framing that was partially true and partially a way of protecting himself from saying something that could be refused. I want the chance to be someone in your life, he said, not to replace what was lost or fix what can't be fixed. Just a chance, whatever that looks like on your terms. He paused. I spent 12 years keeping a bracelet in a locked drawer because I couldn't make myself believe that what we had was as finished as I was supposed to believe it was. I'm not 17 anymore. I don't have the certainty I had at 17 about what love is supposed to look like. But I have the same conviction about you that I had then, and it has survived 12 years of active discouragement, which tells me something. Amara looked at the table, at the folded pages, at the mug. I'm angry, she said. I want you to know that I'm not in a place where anger is something I've resolved. I'm angry at Sumin in a way that I don't have adequate language for. I'm angry at the version of you I believed in for 12 years, even though that version was a lie. I'm angry at your grandmother for keeping it as long as she did. She looked up at him. I'm angry at you for having resources that found all of this out. And I want to be logical about that anger because I know it isn't entirely fair, but it's there anyway. I know. He caught himself. I understand. And in the middle of all that anger, she continued, quieter now, I also understand that none of it was what I thought it was. That the person I was angry at for 12 years, the version of you I built out of that letter, he didn't exist. The real version of you was on a plane back to Korea with your phone taken away, and you didn't know. She picked up the bracelet from the end table beside her. She had put it there, he realized, which meant she had been living with it within reach since the coffee shop. She turned it over in her fingers the way she had before. Both things are true simultaneously. I don't know how to hold both things simultaneously. I've never had to before. Neither have I, he said. She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted, moved toward something more raw and less defended. I went back to that clinic 2 years ago, she said. It came out quieter than anything else she'd said. I requested my full records. I wanted to know everything about the damage and what it meant for my future. The doctor I saw told me that the outcome wasn't inevitable, Seb. That early intervention and proper monitoring might have changed it. She set the bracelet down. I always assumed the complications were just medical, just something that happened. I didn't know there was a window where things could have gone differently if I'd had support. The weight of that sentence sat in the room. Chaewon did not look away from her. He did not try to fill the silence. He understood that some things needed to be said into a space that didn't rush to receive them. I don't know, she said. If knowing that earlier would have helped or made it worse, I still don't know, but it's… She stopped. It's one more thing she took that she didn't have the right to take. Yes, he said, just that. Amara pressed the back of her hand briefly against her mouth, not crying, containing. She had the look of someone who had done a great deal of containing over a great many years and was very practiced at it and was also very tired of it. I want to pursue the legal action, she said, on my own terms. My own lawyer, not yours. Of course. I want a copy of everything you have. You'll have it by tonight. And I want… She stopped, looked at him. I want you to understand that I'm not going to move fast, with any of it, the legal piece and anything else. I'm not built for fast anymore. I learned that about myself. I'm not asking for fast, he said. You flew to Chicago twice in 2 weeks. That's not fast, that's… I had things to tell you that couldn't wait. He met her eyes. I'll wait for everything else. She looked at him for a long moment, measuring. The way she had always looked at him, even at 17, with the particular directness of someone who was seeing you rather than performing the act of seeing you. There's a memorial, she said finally. She said it carefully, like she was handing him something breakable. I made one, a few years ago, for the baby. It's at a botanical garden about 40 minutes from here. I planted something there. I go on the anniversary. She paused. The anniversary is in 3 weeks. He understood what she was offering, not a declaration, not forgiveness, something more specific and more fragile, an invitation to stand in a real place and acknowledge a real loss together, in the same space as the two people it had actually happened to. If you want to, she said. You don't have to. I want to, he said. She nodded, once, short. Okay, she said. He did not stay that night. He went back to the hotel and forwarded every document to her by 8 o'clock as promised. And then he called Sung Jin, and they talked for an hour about the Incheon reconstruction and the board meeting follow-up and the restructuring timeline. And it was real work that needed doing, and he did it. He flew back to Seoul the next morning. The following 3 weeks were the kind of weeks that move in 2 registers simultaneously. On the surface, the operational register. Incheon was rebuilt. The 2-turn contacts were dealt with through channels that were firm and permanent without being irreversible for everyone involved. The board settled. Hyuk-soo honored the withdrawal he had agreed to in the Itaewon restaurant, partly because it was strategically correct and partly because Jaewon had made the alternative precise enough to be understood. The divorce proceeded without the drama Soo-min had threatened to introduce into it. Her lawyers were professional. His were professional. The settlement was significant and fair and finished. Soo-min herself had returned to Seoul the night he called her from the car. She had, as far as his team could determine, not made any further contact with Amara. She had moved into her own apartment in Apgujeong and had, within a week, accepted an introduction to a position at her family's company that was senior enough to preserve her standing without requiring her to be in rooms with people who knew the full shape of things. He did not hate her. He had thought he would. Had thought the full knowledge of what she had done would produce something clean and consuming. Instead, what he had was something more complicated and less satisfying. She had been a young woman who wanted something badly enough to do a terrible thing, and the terrible thing had compounded across years into damage she had probably not fully anticipated when she was 20 years old, sitting across from an 18-year-old girl with a teacup in her hand. That didn't forgive it. It just meant the story was not as simple as a villain in it and a hero and clear sides. Nothing, in his experience, was ever as simple as that. He dealt with the legal situation Amara was pursuing through exactly no interference. He kept his own lawyer informed, ensured the documentation was comprehensive and authenticated, and left the rest entirely to Amara and her attorney. The case would take time. Legal cases always took time. But the documentation was damning, and Amara's lawyer was, from everything Sung Jin's research indicated, very good. In the second week, Amara called him on a Tuesday evening. He was in his office. He answered. I read the documents, she said. Okay. All of them. Okay. A pause. The emergency contact section. Her voice was steady, professionally steady, lawyer steady. There's a note in the administrative record, handwritten. It says, per patient's request, as if I asked for the change. I saw that. She forged a patient request. It appears so. My lawyer says that's the strongest element of the case. She said it with the flat precision of someone who has converted their emotional response into professional analysis, because that is the only way to function. It's direct falsification of a medical record. Yes. She could face serious civil liability. Yes. A silence. Then softer. I keep thinking about the nurse asking me if there was anyone she could call, and I keep thinking there was supposed to be someone. I had put a name down. I wasn't as alone as I thought I was. I was made to be that alone. She exhaled. I can't decide if that's better or worse. I don't think it has to be one or the other, he said carefully. She was quiet for a moment. No, I suppose not. They talked for another 20 minutes. About ordinary things, mostly, the kind that fill the space when extraordinary things have been said, and what's needed is the texture of normal. She told him about a case she was working on. He told her about the restructuring timeline. The first legitimate subsidiary was being formalized, a real estate development company that would take on the first of the organization's cleaned assets. She asked questions about it that were smart and specific. It felt, he thought, like talking to someone he had known for a long time, which was not inaccurate. He flew back to Chicago 3 weeks to the day after the last visit. The Botanical Garden was the kind of place that was beautiful in a subdued November way. Most of the color gone, the trees stripped back to their architecture, the light low and even, and without drama. It was cold, the kind of cold that required actual preparation for, and they had both prepared, heavy coats, scarves, the particular acceptance of outdoor cold that comes from deciding to be somewhere regardless. She was already there when he arrived, standing at a small raised bed in a sheltered section of the garden, looking at what she'd planted, a Japanese maple, he saw as he got closer, still young enough to be slender, its bare branches making a careful shape against the gray sky. He stopped beside her. She didn't look at him immediately. She looked at the tree. "I planted it 5 years ago," she said. "It was about this tall then." She indicated a height with her hand, knee height, roughly. "It's doing well." He looked in at the tree. It was doing well. That was visible. Something growing and establishing itself in ground that was cold but not hostile. "Did you name it?" he said. She glanced at him. Something almost like amusement moved through her eyes. "The tree?" "I don't know. Some people do." "No," she said. "I didn't name it." She looked back at it. "I just... come here. On this day. And stay for a while." He stood beside her and stayed for a while. The garden was quiet. There were other people in the distance, scattered, doing their own things with the afternoon. Near them, there was only the tree and the cold and the sound of wind doing something patient with the bare branches above them. He reached into his coat pocket and took out the bracelet. She looked at it. "I should have brought it back here 12 years ago," he said. "I didn't have the chance, but I've been carrying it since I was 17, and—" He stopped, looked at the tree. "I thought it should be here, if that makes sense, if you want it here." She looked at the bracelet in his open hand for a long moment. Then she took it from him. She crouched down and tucked it carefully into the mulch at the base of the tree. Not buried deep, just resting there at the roots, visible if you looked. She stood back up. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Not formal, real. The way you thank someone when you mean the full weight of it." "Thank you for asking me," he said. They stood there together, not touching, just there, occupying the same ground in the same cold, looking at the same thing. After a while, she said, "I've been thinking about what I need." "Okay." "I need to stay here, in Chicago. My life is here, the work I do, the people I trust. I'm not picking up and moving anywhere. I want to be clear about that. I'm not asking you to. And I need slow." She looked at him. "I know you're someone who makes decisions and moves inside them. I watched you operate at a speed this past month that I couldn't fully keep up with, and I understood why, but that's not how I function. I need slow." "I can do slow," he said. "You'll have to actually do it, not just agree to it." "I know." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not forgiving you today. I want you to understand that. This," she gestured slightly at the tree, at the space between them. "This is acknowledging the truth together. That's different from forgiveness. I know the difference. Forgiveness is a separate thing, and it moves at its own pace, and I can't promise when or what it looks like. I'm not asking you to promise it." She nodded. Then she looked back at the tree. She put her hands in her coat pockets. Her shoulder, slightly, moved closer to his. Not contact, just proximity. A degree of closeness that was chosen rather than accidental. "I missed you," she said quietly. It came out like something she'd been deciding whether to say. "Not the version of you I built out of that letter, the actual version. I missed that version for 12 years, and I didn't let myself call it that because I thought missing someone who chose to leave you was a kind of weakness." She paused. "It wasn't weakness. It was just true." He looked at her profile against the gray sky and the bare branches and felt something that had been held under pressure for a very long time release. Not dramatically, not with the force of something that had been contained too long, but quietly, like a breath let out at the end of a very long hold. "I missed you every single day," he said. "I just called it something else." She turned and looked at him. Her eyes were clear and direct and not performing anything. "Okay," she said. Just that. He understood what it meant. 6 months later, he was in Chicago again. This was not unusual by then. He had been in Chicago 8 times in 6 months, which his team had adjusted to with the quiet professionalism of people who had watched their employer transform from a man who never accounted for personal variables to a man who scheduled around them with the same precision he applied to everything else. The first Baekryong legitimate subsidiary had been operational for 4 months. A second was in formation. The restructuring was not fast. It was, by design, careful. But it was moving, and the people around him had adjusted to the new direction with a mix of skepticism and pragmatic acceptance that he had expected and prepared for. The legal case Amara was pursuing had reached a settlement stage. Soo Min's lawyers had come to the table at the end of the 3rd month, which was faster than anyone had expected. The terms were not public. They did not need to be. Amara had accepted them, and when he had asked her whether she was satisfied, she had said, with the measured evenness of someone who had processed the question thoroughly, "It doesn't fix what happened, but it acknowledges that it happened. That's something." He had not argued with her assessment. She was right. On a Saturday in late spring, he arrived at her apartment with food from a place she liked. She had mentioned it twice in passing over 2 phone calls, which was not the kind of detail he let go. And they ate at her kitchen table with the windows open and the street noise coming in and talked about ordinary things for a long time. After dinner, she said, "The doctor said there's a reasonable possibility, not a certainty, but reasonable." He set down his glass. She was looking at her hands. She had a way of looking at her hands when she was saying something that required courage. He had noticed this, had catalogued it. The particular way she found the surface of the table or the skin of her own knuckles when the words were difficult. "It would be high risk," she said, "and it might not work. And it might work, and then something might go wrong, the way things went wrong before." She looked up at him. "I'm not telling you this as a promise or an invitation to anything. I'm telling you because you're the other person this belongs to, and you deserve to know what's possible." He thought about how to respond to that. He thought about the tree in the garden with the bracelet at its roots. He thought about 53 pages of documentation and a clinic administrator and a nurse asking if there was anyone to call. "Whatever is possible," he said carefully, "I want to be the person in the room this time. Not a name on a form, actually there." She held his gaze. "You'd have to stay in Chicago for however long it took. I know. Your organization, Sungjin, has been functionally running day-to-day operations for 4 months," he said. "It was always going to go that direction as the restructuring progressed." He paused. "I'm not saying any of this lightly. I've thought about it." "When did you think about it?" "Since you told me what the doctor said the first time, 3 months ago." She blinked. "I told you that on the phone in passing." "You mentioned it in passing. I heard it." He held her gaze. "I've been thinking about it since." She looked at him for a long moment. The evening light was coming through the window at an angle that made everything in the room look slightly warmer than it was. He watched her face, the careful, considering, direct face of a woman who had learned to take nothing on faith and everything on demonstrated evidence, which was fair, which was the only reasonable position to have arrived at from where she had arrived. "Slow," she said. "Slow," he agreed. "Starting from right now." Starting from right now. She picked up her glass and sat back in her chair and looked at him with something in her expression that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite anything else. Something occupying the complicated space between relief and wariness and the specific, cautious beginning of trust that had been earned rather than assumed. "You should know," she said, "that I'm difficult to live with. I leave books everywhere. I think out loud. I argue with the news." "I know," he said. "You don't know. You just think you do." "That's fair." The corner of her mouth moved, just slightly. He had kept a bracelet for 12 years. He had filed for divorce at 2:47 in the morning. He had flown across an ocean twice in a month. He had sat across from a rival in an Itaewon restaurant and stabilized an organization that had been trying to fracture beneath him and come out the other side of it. Not because he was without fear, but because he had decided, somewhere in the library of his grandmother's estate in the pre-dawn dark, that the life he had been protecting was not the life he wanted to protect. His grandmother had told him to fix it. He understood now that fixing it did not look the way he had imagined when he first read those words. It was not a dramatic correction. It was not a restoration of something that had existed at 17. It was something slower and more honest and more costly than that. The ongoing daily work of being present in the actual life in front of you, rather than the managed, controlled, strategically arranged version. It was harder. It was the only thing that felt real. 1 year later, they stood in a small room in a hospital in Chicago. Not a crisis, not an emergency. A planned appointment, the kind you arrive at with a bag already packed and two people who are not performing calm, but actually practicing it, which is a different thing. The doctor was someone Amara trusted, had built the relationship over 2 years, had chosen with the same careful diligence she brought to everything. The room was ordinary. The equipment was ordinary. The nurse who came in to check vitals was kind and professional and not remarkable in any way. Chewan sat in the chair beside the bed and held Amara's hand. She had told him, once, that she had a rule about not hoping too hard for things that weren't certain, that she had learned the cost of hope misplaced and had built her life around being realistic rather than optimistic. He understood the rule. He had lived by something similar for 12 years. He also understood, sitting in that room, that there was a difference between protecting yourself from disappointment and refusing to be present in something real. He had confused those two things for most of his adult life. He was not confused about it now. She looked at him. He looked back. "It's okay," she said. To him, or to herself, or to both of them. "I know," he said. She raised her eyebrow slightly. "It is," he said. "Whatever happens. It's okay." She turned her hand in his so that their fingers were laced together instead of him just holding her hand, and she looked at the ceiling for a moment and breathed. He watched the side of her face in the fluorescent light of an ordinary hospital room and thought about a photograph of two teenagers outside a school building, and a girl laughing at something just off camera, and the weight of her hand on his arm like she never had to think about it. He had thought that was the last moment where things were simple. He understood now that simplicity was never what made it matter. It was the other thing, the complicated, costly, imperfect, surviving thing. The thing that had been stolen and had not died despite the stealing. The thing that had grown in silence for 12 years the way a tree grows in ground that is cold but not hostile. The doctor came in. They both turned to look at her. The doctor sat down across from them and opened the folder she was carrying and looked up at them both with the practiced expression of someone who delivers news for a living and has learned to let the news speak rather than performing it. And then she spoke, and Amara's hand tightened in his. And outside the hospital window, the Chicago afternoon was moving at its usual continuous pace, buses and people and all the ordinary machinery of a city that does not pause for any single thing happening inside any single room. And inside that room, two people sat together in the full weight of what they had fought to reach and held on.